Hello everyone, and welcome back to another strange historical story. The Flying Saucer Enigma. The chaos and confusion of those early days of saucer activity took a sinister turn with Captain Thomas Mantell's tragic encounter with a UFO over Godman Field Air Base in Kentucky. The morning of January the 7th, 1948, officers of the Kentucky State Highway Patrol received a number of calls inquiring about any unusual aircraft that the Air Force might be testing in the area. A resident of Marysville, Kentucky, had sighted unfamiliar aircrafts flying over their city. At 1:15 p.m., the Kentucky Highway Patrol called the control towers at Godman and asked if they have any craft that might be flying over Marysville and troubling the city's residents. Goodman Field checked with flight service at Wright-Patterson and received a negative response in their query of test craft in the area. Within about 20 minutes, however, the Highway Patrol informed the tower operators of Goodman Field that they were now receiving reports of strange aircraft circular about 250 to 300 feet in diameters over Owensboro and Abington. In another 10 minutes, the tower operators of Godman were sighting the object for themselves. Once they were satisfied that they were not seeing an aeroplane or a weather balloon, they put in calls to the base operations officer, the base intelligence officer, and several other high-ranking personnel. At 2:30 p.m., 45 minutes later, base personnel were still discussing among themselves what course of action would be best to direct against UFOs. At that time, 4 F-51s were sighted approaching Goodman Field from the south. The tower radioed flight leader Captain Thomas Mantell and requested that he take a closer look at the flying saucer and attempt to identify it or prove a more complete description of the object. Mantell was still climbing at 10,000 feet when he made his last radio contact with the tower at Goodman Field. "It looks metallic. It's tremendous in size. It's above me, and I'm gaining on it. I'm going to 20,000 feet. Those were Mantell's last words. His wing saw him disappear into, clouds. A few minutes later, Mantell crashed to the earth in his F-51 and was killed. The Air Force issued an official explanation that Captain Mantell, experienced though pilot he was, had unfortunately been killed while trying to reach the planet Venus. Such an explanation of Captain Mantell's tragic demise remains a controversial story, of course, as it was 1948. If Mantell, an experienced pilot, misidentified the planet Venus for an unidentified flying object, then, in addition to Captain Mantell's fatal misidentifications, the crew in the control tower, the base operations officer, the base intelligence officer, and several high-ranking personnel had all been deceived by the planet Venus. The official explanation would have us believe that even Mantell found himself below the object and described it as metallic and tremendous in size. He was actually aiming his F-51 at a planet that was millions of miles distant in outer space. Another attack over Fargo, North Dakota. October the 1st, 1948. George F. Gorman, a 25-year-old second lieutenant in the North Dakota Air National Guard, was waiting his turn to land at Fargo when he was startled by the sudden appearance of a bright light that made a pass at him. When he called the tower to complain about the irresponsible pilot who had nearly collided with him, he was informed that the only aircraft in the vicinity was a Piper Cub that was just touching down on the landing field, and his own F-51. Baffled, Gorman scanned the skies and found that he could still see the mysterious light off to one side. More than a little irritated by the careless pilot's near-fatal misjudgment, he decided to investigate and determine the undeclared aircraft's identity. Within moments, he found himself under attack when the strange light put itself into collision course with the F-51. Gorman had to take his craft into a dive to escape the unswerving globe of light. Then, to his horror, the UFO repeated its charge. Once again, he just managed to escape collision. When the UFO at last disappeared and ceased its passes at the F-51, Gorman was left shaken and convinced that its manoeuvres were controlled by thought or by reason. Memories of World War II and fears of the Cold War added to the concern over flying saucers. Late 1940s were the early days of the Cold War, and for a time the possibility that the flying discs might be Russians in origin, the product of kidnapped German scientists, seemed very real in the Air Force, said Hayden C. Hughes, a longtime UFO researcher. By the summer of 1948, the Air Force began to consider the possibility that the discs were implementary in origin. By the end of 1949, the Air Force had decided there was nothing to flying saucers that a good dose of ignoring them wouldn't cure. The pesky saucers kept returning, however, and by the fall of 1951, the Air Force was back in the saucer-chasing business once again. Yep, and that is the story of, well, it's a little bit of history of the flying saucers. I guess the disc-shaped objects that people see in the sky. Many blessings.